To the Right Honourable Henry Risley, Earl of Southampton and Baron of Titchfield. The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end, whereof this pamphlet without beginning is but a superfluous moiety. The warrant I have of your honourable disposition, not the worth of my untutored lines, makes it assured of acceptance. What I have done is yours. What I have to do is yours. Being part in all I have, devoted yours. Were my worth greater, my duty would show greater. Meantime, as it is bound to your lordship, to whom I wish long life, still lengthened with all happiness. Your lordships, in all duty, William Shakespeare.
Sir! Wasn't he a Nancy, sir? Look at that earring, sir. All them theatrical types were at it, sir. Boys dressing up as girls and all that. 4 centuries, school children and scholars alike have looked at Shakespeare's plays about girls dressing up as boys, dressing up as girls, and thought, isn't this all a bit gay? Well, today we're going to blow the dust off the complete works and lay out all the evidence. Was William Shakespeare, commonly considered the greatest writer in the English language, a big gay icon? But first... These days, we tend to frame discussions of sexuality around questions of identity. It's right there in the acronym: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, all words referring to what someone is on the inside, how they identify. But this framing is very new. In fact, all these words are very new. The word gay has existed since the 14th century, but it didn't mean homosexual until the 20s or the 30s. Bisexual was originally coined in 1824 to mean having both kinds of sexual organs, and the meaning only flipped to be about sexual attraction in 1914. Transgender is very new indeed, coming from the 1970s. Out of all of them, lesbian is the oldest. It originally just meant coming from the Greek island of Lesbos, meaning you can have lesbian wine. But Lesbos is also known for the Greek poet Sappho, who wrote love poems to both men and women. People have been saying, is she, from the island of Lesbos, since the 1730s. But the main meaning really was just from Lesbos until the 20th century, when the meaning female homosexual overtook it. And indeed, heterosexual only goes back to 1894 and wasn't in widespread use until the 1960s. So you will never find a text from Shakespeare's time saying, I am gay or I am trans in so many words. In fact, you'll be hard pushed to even find something that says, I only like men, or I like women. People in Shakespeare's time just didn't think of who they were attracted to as part of their identity. Instead, you see a focus on the things that someone does, the acts they take. So-and-so did this specific act, such as in this letter from 1601 accusing the Earl of Southampton of getting a little too close with a captain of his called Piers Edmonds. He ate and drank at his table and lay in his tent. The Earl Southampton would cull and hug him in his arms and play wantonly with him. None of this is about who the Earl is on the inside, or even who he's attracted to. This isn't a mask-off moment. This is something he did. Even in law, homosexuality itself, simply being attracted to another man, isn't the crime. It's buggery, unorthodox sex like anal sex or bestiality that's the crime. People in the 16th century didn't identify as homosexual or heterosexual any more than today someone identifies as a burglar. All of which is to say that the modern way of thinking of sexuality as identity is something that's pretty new, and if you're not careful when applying it to people in the past, you can be ahistoric. The boxes that we have today to sort people into are not the same boxes that they had in 16th century England. We can't time travel back to Shakespeare's day and ask him, are you gay? And even if we could, he would not know what that meant. So this stuff is less about, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on the charge of being a massive gay, Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty? Where we have to decide one way or another at the end. I am not here to draw a conclusion. I am here to lay out the evidence before you. More things that made me go,
So Shakespeare is born in a little market town called Stratford-upon-Avon, and his dad is a local bigwig, and he has a string of civic positions like High Bailiff and Alderman, and that means he gets to rule on little local court cases like, who's not cleaned out their guttering, and who's let the pigs out into the street. He's very ambitious. He actually applies for a coat of arms at one point. And as High Bailiff, his family gets to sit in the front row at church. What a perk! So being a bigwig in Stratford is still a pretty small wig, basically anywhere else. But he does have a little bit of power and influence. And as the eldest surviving son, William Shakespeare is the one who's going to inherit his house and his estate. But instead of a considered, planned, arranged marriage between two big families in the area, instead our Will has a pretty hasty marriage to a lady called Anne Hathaway. We know it's hasty because he's relatively young. From the church records in Stratford, we can see that most men married for the first time at an older age than our Will did. He's just 18 when he gets married to Anne Hathaway. In fact, he's so young that he still needs his dad's permission to marry. Not only that, but they also get a special arrangement to be married as soon as possible. Normally, before you get married, your priest has to read out to the whole congregation your intention to get married 3 times, so that anyone who's got an objection can come forward, but they get special permission to just have it read out once. And Anne Hathaway gives birth to their eldest child, Susanna, 6 months after the wedding. So historians have generally interpreted this to mean that Shakespeare got Anne Hathaway pregnant out of wedlock. If you trace back the birth of their child 9 months, you get to August 1582, which we know was a particularly good harvest year. And when the harvest came in, there would have been parties and dancing and music and drinking and high spirits. Maybe Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway just had a bit too much of a good time. The pair go on to have 2 more children in 1585, a set of twins called Judith and Hamnet, Hamnet with an N. Apparently they were named after their godparents, which means there was not one but 2 people walking around in Stratford called Hamnet. And then of course we have the plays. Every inch of Shakespeare's plays have been analysed through the lens of queer theory, most notably his comedies like As You Like It and Twelfth Night, both of which feature a girl dressing up as a boy and then another boy finds her weirdly attractive.
How apt the poor are to be proud!
You might know that women weren't allowed on stage in Shakespeare's day, so all of his female roles were not only played by men, but were designed to be played by men. Desdemona's a man, Juliet's a man, Lady Macbeth is a literal drag queen. In recent years, productions that make the plays even more gay have been pretty popular, most notably the National Theatre's production of Twelfth Night, where Malvolio becomes a closeted lesbian, and their production of Midsummer Night's Dream, where it's Oberon who falls in love with the donkey-eared Bottom and not Titania. But no matter how gay the characters are on stage, I don't think we can take this to mean anything about Shakespeare the man. Like, he also wrote a lot of Italian characters, but I don't think you could argue that therefore he was Italian. I don't think you can even argue that he knew a lot of Italians. He set several plays in Venice without seemingly having any idea that Venice has canals and that's like its whole thing. Strike it from the record! Next, the poems. So, unlike the plays, the poems aren't written from the point of view of a particular character, although they're not exactly Shakespeare's diary entries transcribed into sonnet form either. Of course, poetry is fiction too. But unlike the plays, Shakespeare seems to write his sonnets for a private audience, maybe just him and a couple of his mates. He mostly writes the sonnets in the 1590s, but they don't get published until 1609, and even then it's not clear that he actually wanted them to be published. They might have been published without his consent. And you can see why when you read them. Some of them are really personal. They're embarrassing. They talk about sexual revulsion and humiliation and betrayal and self-loathing. So sonnets are meant to be love poems, and yet some of them are definitely written to a man, like 126, which starts, "O thou my lovely boy, who in thy power dost hold time's fickle glass." Just the act of addressing any sonnet, even one that's not explicitly about romantic love, to a man is embarrassing enough that one publisher in 1640 felt the need to change the pronouns to make it seem like Shakespeare was talking about a lady. So Shakespeare didn't decide on the order of the sonnets that we generally agree on today. He didn't give them numbers. But scholars tend to agree that they are addressed to three separate characters: the fair youth, the dark lady, and Cupid, the god of love. Of those, the vast majority, 126 out of 154, are addressed to the fair youth. And these are the nice ones that get read out at weddings. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds." So maybe the fair youth is one person in particular, or maybe it's several people. But if we go by the sonnets, Shakespeare is definitely in love with at least one man. But out, alack, he was but 1 hour mine. The regent cloud hath masked him from me now. Yet him for this my love no whit disdaineth. Sons of the world may stain, when heaven's sun staineth. And lest you think I'm some snowflake millennial injecting identity politics in where it doesn't belong, Shakespeare scholars have been talking about this as far back as 1780. Edmund Malone says of the fair youth, to this person, whoever he was, 120 of the following poems are addressed, and the remaining 28 are addressed to a lady. And in 1817, Shakespeare scholar Nathan Drake says nothing but extreme carelessness could have induced other Shakespeare scholars, Gideon and Sewell, to conceive that the prior part of these sonnets was directed to a female. The fair youth sonnets are about love and the fleeting nature of beauty. Shakespeare talks about how the fair youth stole his girlfriend, and how there's this other, better rival poet who's usurping him in the affections of the fair youth. When we get to Sonnet 127, we're introduced to another character who scholars have called the Dark Lady. "Therefore my mistress' brows are raven black." So the Dark Lady is also beautiful, and the poet is also in love with her, but it's a lot more complicated. Unlike the fair youth, who the poet finds as beautiful as the sun, my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. "When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. In faith I do not love thee with mine eyes, for they in thee 1,000 errors note." And again, we don't know for sure that these are meant to be read in Shakespeare's voice. For all we know, this is a fictional point of view character. We can all enjoy Bohemian Rhapsody without thinking that Freddie Mercury literally just killed a man. But lots of songs and poems are about things that the author is genuinely going through, like Wake Me Up When September Ends is about Billy Joe Armstrong coming to terms with the death of his father, and Born This Way wouldn't have been written at all if not for Lady Gaga's bisexuality and her widespread fandom in the LGBT community. And if you're writing a sonnet at the time, there is an expectation that it is a love poem sent to the person that you're in love with. Otherwise, why wouldn't you just publish it? The thing is, we don't have very much written in Shakespeare's voice at all. We have 14 words in his own handwriting, 12 of which are just his signature. We've got a couple of legal records that mention him. We've got an epitaph that he might have written for a guy who lived near his theatre, and we have 2 dedications. So as well as the plays and the sonnets, Shakespeare also writes 2 long poems, Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece, which he dedicates to his patron, the Earl of Southampton. So this is quite a normal thing to do at the time. You write a nice poem, you dedicate it to a wealthy patron, and in return, maybe they'll give you a couple of guineas, maybe they'll let you stay at their house, maybe they'll let you use their library. So the first dedication that he writes to the Earl is quite formal.
"I know not how I shall offend in dedicating my unpolished lines to your lordship, nor how the world will censure me for choosing so strong a prop to support so weak a burden. Only, if your honour seem but pleased, I account myself highly praised, and vow to take advantage of all idle hours till I have honoured you with some graver labour."
So this is very boilerplate language for the time. He's basically saying, oh, this rubbish little poem isn't worthy of you, but I hope you like it. And if you like it, I'll be very proud, and I promise to write something better next time. And indeed, the next year he dedicates another poem to the Earl, and this time the dedication is a lot more personal.
The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end, whereof this pamphlet without beginning is but a superfluous moiety. What I have done is yours. What I have to do is yours. Being part in all I have, devoted yours.
It sounds like love, right? Even the act of getting a second dedication at all shows that there's definitely at least a reciprocal friendship between the two. Like, the Earl wouldn't have let him use his name twice if he didn't at least get on with the guy. Oh, have I been using this portrait to talk about the Earl of Southampton? I'm sorry, this is a portrait from when he was older. This is also a portrait of the Earl of Southampton from when he was younger. Shaboom! Maybe he's the fair youth! So the Earl of Southampton is married. In fact, this is his wife. But there are rumours at the time that he's attracted to men, as we saw earlier. And that's it. As with anything to do with Shakespeare's thoughts and feelings, there's very little to go on in the historic record. We have church records of when he was married and when his children were baptised. We have his plays, which I argue don't really tell us anything about the playwright himself. The poems, which are addressed to both a man and a woman. And the dedications for 2 long poems to the Earl of Southampton. Although buggery is illegal in Shakespeare's time, very few people are ever convicted, mostly because the law requires witnesses. And generally there's only 2 witnesses to this sort of thing, and you don't want to put your own head in the noose. I saw William Shakespeare at the Devil's Sacrament. Girl, what were you doing at the Devil's Sacrament? Men sharing a bed is pretty common at this time. You might share a bed with relatives or servants. If you're staying at an inn, you might share one with the other customers. Even men kissing is very normal, which means if you're a famous playwright and his patron wealthy earl, you could probably get away with it. In Shakespeare's play, Henry V, the Dukes of York and Suffolk are both mortally wounded on the battlefield, and York kisses Suffolk on the lips in a last embrace as they die together. And instead of being seen as aberrant or suspect, this is played as a very touching moment between 2 brave cousins that makes everybody who hears about it cry. So did he turn, and over Suffolk's neck he threw his wounded arm and kissed his lips. And so, espoused to death, with blood he sealed a testament of noble ending love.
Thank you so much for watching. I just want to give a shout out to all the incredibly attractive names that are scrolling up your screen as we speak. These are the people who kick in a few quid every month to help me make these videos, and in return, I make you look at their names. If you'd like to be part of them, head to my Patreon and chip in. You can also find me on the Clock app at @JDraperLondon, where I post much more regularly short form content. Thank you so much.